Lovely introduction. I feel very honoured to be here. My first time as a CEBS conference, so thank you very much for inviting me and for the excellent organisation. Wonderful conference that I've experienced so far. As Linda said, I work in Norwich for Norwich Institute for Language Education, and my academic background is in language testing and assessment. My professional background is in educational technology, but at heart I'm a teacher, and so I thought this is the way to combine these three things. And we're here together to talk about 21st century skills, and I'd like to argue that in the 21st century, teaching is actually the ultimate 21st century skill. It demands creativity, it demands critical thinking, it demands collaboration with peers, with students, with authorities. It demands communication, of course. It demands plurilingual competence. All of you in this room have huge plurilingual competence, far more than me. It demands pluricultural competence, mediating the worlds in which English is used, whether that's English amongst a native speaker population, English as a second language, English as a lingua franca, any other languages used. You are the mediator as a teacher of those worlds, of those cultures for the learners that you work with, and introducing them to the different cultural aspects of languages is part of your job as a 21st century teacher. I think it also, in the 21st century, demands a certain amount of digital literacy. Nikki was talking about one aspect of that today. And I'd also like to argue that it demands a certain amount of assessment literacy. Assessment literacy that's shamefully missing in many of our pre-service education programs to really understand what underpins the way we evaluate, measure, test, assess the students that we work with. So all of that demands teacher empowerment. Teachers to have a role, an active role in decision making, both in the classroom context but also in the wider educational sphere. So we've got some technology, we've got a room full of teachers, we're missing a test, so we're going to start with a test. Nice simple banked gap fill. There's your bank of words, and there's your text. It's a timed test. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, starting from now. How'd you get on? This is self-assessment. You're going to mark yourself. Here are the correct answers. What do you think then? Teacher empowerment, critical thinking, criticising, active, respond to, transmitting, being an intelligent medium of action. Sounds pretty 21st century, do you reckon? Not even 20th century, this one. This is a quote from John Dewey. But I think this is critical to what we do as teachers in the 21st century, and I'm going to try and bring together some of these strands, the ideas of having these 21st century skills as a teacher, having digital literacy, and having assessment literacy as well. So I want to start with that question of why is it that testing amongst teachers is something of a black sheep. Does this work in Australia? Do you have the term, the black sheep of the family? Yeah. Many teachers are afraid, unsure, often resistant, hostile to testing or its parent assessment. Why is that? Why is it? Is it because of a lack of appropriate teacher training? in our pre-service education? Is it because we have been tested as students ourselves and know that shiver of anxiety that runs down your spine just at the very mention of the word test? Or is it something a little bit deeper, something that we're not quite comfortable with in the way we're asked to measure? I want to illustrate this with my son. I've brought my son along with me. Here he is. This is him, aged 2.5, and he's learning something. He's learning some language. Okay? And you're going to watch a short video of him learning this language. I want you to do 3 things for me while you're watching. The first thing is to identify what's the target focus of this learning experience. What's he trying to learn here? It's language, but what bit of the language is he trying to learn? The second thing I want you to look out for is, are there any principles of good pedagogy in what you see? Are there any aspects of what you think is a good learning and teaching experience within this? Anything that you would say, yeah, that works for me. And finally, I want you to think, when does teaching turn to testing? All within this 1-minute clip we're going to see. So, what's the target language focus? What are the principles of good pedagogy that you see? And when does teaching turn to testing?
A yellow one. Get a green one, Lukey. A green one. Can you find a green one? Look, here. Here's a green one. Oh, that's a yellow one. Can you get a green one now? Yeah, good boy. Another green one. That's good. And a yellow one. Now a yellow one.
The yellow one?
No, that's a green one. A yellow one. The other colour. There's the other colour. There, yellow one. Good. What colour's that, Lucy?
So, with the person next to you, your answers to those 3 questions. What was the target language focus? What principles of teaching and learning did you see in that clip? And when did teaching turn to testing? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to discuss with the person next to you. Let's hear some voices from the floor. What was the target language focus there? Colours more specifically? Green and yellow. Manageable for a 2.5-year-old? Conceptually, cognitively?
Yeah.
Principles of good teaching and learning. Were there any? Tell me some things that you saw that you thought.
Praise.
Praise, absolutely. Yeah. Lots of praise, lots of encouragement. Yeah. Any more?
Feedback.
Support, hints, yeah. Scaffolding there. Feedback, yeah. Not confrontational feedback. Absolute tolerance of error. No pressure in that when you made mistakes. No pressure there. Anything else? Learning by doing. Yes, absolutely. Using all the using the senses, kinesthetic, tactile aspects there. Repetition, yeah. Task repetition, and at its own pace as well. What else might we say in there? There's an outcome, there's a clear end, there's a task that he's trying to achieve with this, there's a non-linguistic aim to the activity. Game-based, yeah. All of these things we would say, yeah, okay, I like that as learning, that's good learning, that's good teaching practice, yeah, okay, fine. When did teaching turn to testing? Great, yeah, right at the end there you heard him ask the question. Right, you've had your learning time, now it's the test. What colour's that one? Okay, now bear in mind, this is my son. Oops. Bear in mind, this is my son. Do you think he's going to get it right? He's about to put the final quote onto the bowl. He's been asked the test question, what colour is that one? Hands up if you think he's going to get it right.
There's always a man.
Okay, thank you for your belief. Let's have a look at what happens. So we've said, target focus is yellow and green, achievable, manageable. He's had some good learning practice in there. Now it's time for the test.
What colour's that, Lukey?
Red.
This is why teachers hate testing. Where did that come from? We've had this learning experience of this manageable content. We know it, you can do it. Get to the test, and out he comes with red. What on earth is going on? He's okay. He can do yellow and green now. He's now unusual. It wasn't a damaging experience for him, that particular test. But what's happened there? Well, one way to look at it might be that we know input doesn't necessarily equal intake and doesn't immediately equal output. Maybe he just wasn't ready for that to emerge, for that learning to have happened, for him to have acquired that language in order to reproduce it productively. Maybe that's something that was going on. Maybe there's a trigger in his head. He's seen other things there, and for some other reason, he's got that word coming out. But I think there's something even more troubling here. What was the target language again? Your answer to my first question. What was the target focus? Two colours, yellow and green, wasn't it? That was what it said. Yellow, green, that's a green one, that's a yellow one, that's a green one, is this a yellow one, that's a green one? That was the focus of all the learning. What was the test question? What colour is that one? So actually, we're testing him on something far more complex than yellow and green. We're saying not only are yellow and green these names, but they're part of a whole set. A superordinate term for colours is what we call these, and that's the test question we're going to be tested on. So we've actually used a testing approach, which is fundamentally undermining the way we've been teaching him. We've taught him yellow and green, and we've tested him with something that's completely different. It's an invalid assessment. It doesn't work. And it's not his fault. It's his mum's fault. But, we all did it. But that's the thing. What do we need to know about assessment to look underneath the surface, to be confident that the way we're testing, the way we're measuring, the way we're assessing, is supporting the teaching and the learning practice that's going on in the classroom? I now think that actually what's probably happened there for him is that he's got a primed bit of lexis, and that he's heard the word red most commonly associated with the word colour in his life experience so far, and so the instant trigger with the word colour is the word red, without any kind of thinking going on. It's just a reaction. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it's a bad test question. And the test writer should be punished. He's got it now. He's now overcome that. Oops, sorry.
What colour's that, Lukey?
So we want to talk a little bit about the assessment today, and the aspects of assessment, but I also want to talk about the importance of technology within that. I don't know about you, how long you've been teaching, but I started off as a 20th century teacher, and in my classroom, when I started teaching, was this technology. Loved it. Tape recorder, fantastic. We got sold a bad deal when we moved to CDs, I think. The tape recorders, you could record it, you could move it, you could key it up. Suddenly we had CDs, you can't record them. And then you had your overhead projector. Technology. If you worked in a really nice posh school, you might have had one of these. Anyone know what this is? Very, very expensive piece of kit. This is an electronic pencil sharpener. You may not have had one of these where you worked. Fast forward to where we are now, and it's a little bit overwhelming, isn't it? The amount of potential technology that could be applied in educational contexts is a bit overwhelming. How do we stay on top of it? Do we stay on top of it? Do we open the doors and embrace what we know is the world that our students are living in? Or do we hold that door firmly closed and say this is a communicative space and it's about person-to-person communication, and technology is only going to hinder things? Well, probably somewhere in the middle. We know that there are problems with technology. technology in our daily lives causes us problems. I love this little quote about technology in the future. We can all empathise with that, I think, a little bit. It was so much simpler before. I had to do this, and this with the devices that are around us. And also, we have this kind of fear of where technology and education may take us away from the principles, the things that we know we can do well as human raters, particularly when we talk about testing. This idea of where are we going with technology and testing? What is it that computers might take over in terms of our ability and our role and our responsibilities to make judgments, to measure our students in ways that we're comfortable with, that we think are valid? Are we handing over too much potential power to the machines? Is this something we have to be careful of? Are we terrified of the next step, where it's leading, the slippery slope of technology in testing and assessment, in teaching and testing? Back in 1910, a French artist called Villemond did a series of paintings predicting, from his standpoint in 1910, what he thought the world would be like in the year 2000. He did pictures of architecture, of transport, of home life. This was his painting of what he thought education would be like in the year 2000, from his standpoint in 1910. Kind of terrifying vision of education, isn't it? The students wired in, individual only, passive recipients of this knowledge. The poor child who doesn't have the technology reduced to not being able to participate. The teacher reduced to content provider, transmitting the information, nothing more. Is that what we're afraid of when we talk about technology in education in the future? Or is it even the future? Back in 1960, the first approaches to using computer technology for assessment started to be designed. You know, we're 58 years on from this. Surely we've had time to work out the teething troubles, to decide what we like and what we don't like. Surely we've had sound advice which gives us best practice guidelines and ways in which we can comfortably implement the technology that's around us in the classroom. Following Pitt Calder's words, are we at a stage where we have only things that we use in our educational spheres which add to what we can do, rather than do them differently just because we can? In our world, my professional world in Nile, we're very much involved in teacher education. And so one of the main aspects of our looking at technology for teaching and for assessment is in the teacher education context. What we do in our face-to-face classes, are there ways in which we can take that into a digital space, whether that's blended, whether that's online? Is this something that technology can add something to it? Of course it's going to be different, but is it equally effective? There are claims for what online learning, blended learning can do, that they can offer more flexibility, more control, pathways chosen by the learners, options presented by the teacher, self-guided, learning at their own pace, that teachers in these teacher education programs will have time to consider their responses. They're not just put on the spot and forced to give an answer immediately, instinctive reactions, but they have time to think about what's happening. That they have time to revisit the content. It's not just the teacher who determines the pace of the input, but the learners have some control over the way they process the input. They can revisit things, they can reflect them. That for those who are providing this education, the costs can be reduced, the bricks and mortar costs can be reduced, that we can bring a global context to a classroom, that we can have teachers in a space from all around the world sharing their contextual realities looking for the similarities and the differences between the way they teach, the way they approach education. And also that you can study in your own context. It would be lovely if everybody could come to Norwich and spend time with us studying together on teacher education programmes. But what about the implementation phase? Does potential of online learning allow us to say, well, take this into your classroom on Monday, see if it works, we'll meet again on Friday and we'll talk about the effectiveness. We get the implementation stage in the middle of the training. And the potential for cross-contextual comparison. So we were looking at all of these things thinking, right, this has got to be a way in which we can embrace the potential for technology and bring it to what we do in terms of training, teaching, working with teachers. So we were looking, okay, let's focus in on the testing. What do we think that teachers really need in terms of assessment literacy? When we're working with teachers and we're thinking about understanding the way that testing and assessment works, what do teachers want? What do teachers need to be empowered and active agents in the assessment they use? And these are some of the things that the teachers in our study, when we looked at the face-to-face courses, we used a questionnaire that was designed by Glenn Fulker. And these are the kind of things that teachers were interested in. These were the top selected elements that teachers felt in terms of testing literacy, assessment literacy, understanding the tests they use, the tests they prepare students for, that they wanted to understand more what reliability meant, that validation was important, that they felt comfortable that what they were doing was a fair way of judging, how to rate effectively, how to make those decisions, how to decide that that measurement is based on an appropriate sample and is giving a grade that's appropriate. Deciding what to test. Of all the things that we could measure, what do we select? How do we do that in the classroom? How do we actually talk to others about our tests? How do we interpret the scores? How do we make the marks meaningful? How do we evaluate the tests that somebody else has designed? What is the impact of the test on the learning that precedes it? And how do we go through a design process? So all of these things were kind of in the mixer of things that we wanted to try and embrace working online, using technology to help teachers understand the world of assessment. But then you've got to think, well, what is it about technology that isn't as dynamic, isn't as personal, isn't as effective as being in a face-to-face context? How do we get that laughter, that spontaneity, that all in this together feeling in an online, a blended learning space? How do we get that real engagement when we're working with technology, rather than, it's there, it's one of the many things I have to do, I'll do it when I'm watching TV on the side. And the kind of things that we have as a challenge is to vary the modes of the way we use technology in the way that we vary our activities in the classroom. We don't have students sitting in rows doing the same kind of activity all the time, so we can't do that in the online space. We get in real trouble if all that we're doing in terms of teacher education is, here's an article, discuss it in the forum. Here's an article, discuss it in the forum. That's not learning. We get things that will happen here. Oh. Yeah, of course you're going to get bored of it. It's just pure repetition if we do that. What did you expect? You can't say, oh, it's fine because it's online. The medium will carry everything for us. It's the part of the world we're in today, so therefore it must be enjoyable, engaging. You can't say, well, this activity worked when I did it in a face-to-face class. Why doesn't it work when I've put it online? And it's not really very helpful when you're working with technology to say, not working, not sure why, move on. So some of the things that we look at as kind of crucial to bring the online space alive are things like what we call a community wall, a space for sharing, brainstorming, that kind of activity that you do in the classroom, whether it's with a big piece of paper in front of you, whether it's putting post-it notes on the wall, whether it's writing on the whiteboard. That's a real focused brainstorm activity. We can get all this content out and shared and moved around and organised in an online space. For those of you who are coming to the workshop after this, we'll look at a tool that does this outside of our platform, a free tool for doing something similar. Things that actually ask students to respond to video content, changing up that modality, not just text, but video and annotated video, using a video where you can actually ask questions at different points in the video, rather than here's the content, when you get to the end there'll be some questions about things you've probably forgotten. Can we ask the questions in the middle of the video? And again, I'll show you a tool for doing this in the workshop this afternoon. And tools in which we allow that multimodality to come through. Yes, it's a discussion, it's based on some input, but you have a choice. Do you respond with text? Do you respond with your webcam? Do you respond with your microphone? You have the choice over the mode of response. That's something that the online platform offers as an advantage. Very often we have to choose a single mode when we're in the face-to-face classroom. We have to say to our students, you can do either this or this. Is kind of not always within our power in the face-to-face classroom, but we can offer those things. And so we have another issue here. What happens if we ask for collaboration? Are we going to expect that this collaboration will be forthcoming from the teachers? Or will they feel, these are my ideas, this is my content, I can't share it? Well, there are different approaches to this. That if we do have a global context, if we are able to use technology to bring people together in the online space, then we can actually have a collaborative, co-constructed learning experience rather than an individual, single teacher-student response track. So, what we need to do is to think in our context about how do we make sure that the content is most relevant to the local context? How do we make sure that the coverage of the course is being followed by all these different pathways that are available? How do we encourage participation? How do we actually do things practically? What's the time consideration? Some of the things we'll be looking at in the workshop about what are the practicalities of choosing to use these tools to assess our learners. Does it increase the workload on teachers? Does it eat into that already precious time that teachers have? How do we make sure that when we mark according to criteria, that we're reliable? How do we allow people to work together and still be assessed on their individual strengths, or do we even need to? It's this funny thing, isn't it? What in the real world we call collaboration, in the educational world we call cheating. So what is it about collaborative submissions that we're so scared of in our educational sphere? Because we have to put students into order or give them all a number. And what is it that's going to have an impact through these? But that's not the only thing that technology might allow us to consider as part of our assessment literacy. I don't know if any of you have heard of or know what this is on screen. Anyone seen one of these before? This is called a learnometer. And it may sound silly, but it's actually an incredibly interesting aspect of research. The learnometer was designed by Professor Stephen Heppel. You can read lots about it on his website. But actually what the learnometer does is it asks teachers to consider all those other aspects of the assessment experience or the learning experience which were previously unmeasurable. But actually the learnometer gives us an insight into how we can measure them. For example, light levels in the classroom. The learnometer will tell you if there's appropriate light for learning. Good lighting significantly influences reading scores, vocabulary scores, science scores. Just the very fact of having dim, low, inappropriate, dirty, dusty lighting can really affect the learning experience. You know, we have this intuitive feeling if we walk into a darkened room. I mean, we choose to have a garden for particular activities, but if there isn't sufficient light, it can affect the learning experience. If technology can tell us that, can give us that information, surely that's a good thing. It also measures temperature and humidity. The optimum from the data that Stephen Hepler's has pulled together. If we go much beyond 21 degrees C as a temperature in the room we're working in, there's an absolute proportional decline in scores. The hotter it gets, the worse students perform. Do we know this? Do we measure this? Do we check this? Should we? Is that something that technology will allow us to not just assess the students, but assess the environment in which we're working with them? But sound, external sound distraction is a real problem, and that the amount of ambient noise can really affect that concentration, that learning experience. That carbon dioxide can massively affect the way in which students perform, certainly in a testing situation, but also in a general learning situation. Horrified by the damaging levels. Stephen Hepler's most memorable quote for me is, if you want your child to do well at school, the best two pieces of advice you can give your child are sit near a window and open it. The impact from the data, not anecdotal but hard data, of the impact of light and oxygen on the learning process is not something we can ignore. And that's a real feature now of technology aiding the way in which we can teach and measuring things which previously were intangible and inaccessible. But we do, of course, have another aspect to technology in our teaching. We have the information overload, and we have the information quality. We have to consider what we need to know as teachers when we're introducing technology, particularly digital internet access to students. We have to be careful, as Anderson says, about information media hygiene. Would you feed your kids a half-eaten casserole a stranger handed you on the bus? Or give them medicine you got from some lady at the gym? Well, of course not. But if we tell them to go and search for this information on the internet, or we use internet-based content which we haven't critically evaluated ourselves as teachers, Anderson would argue we're doing a similar thing. So a key part of teachers' own digital literacy is this information literacy. You've probably heard of this hoax site. Has anyone heard of this before? A study in the States where the teacher created a fake website on this animal that he called the Pacific Northwest tree octopus, and told his students to go and research it. Of course, they went off, they Googled, they found his site. All of them came back into class, all of them, this was grade 7 students, all of them came back into class saying that they had found information about this animal. Even when he told them it was a hoax, more than half of the class refused to believe him because they found it on the internet. And yet, that kind of media literacy hadn't gone through to think, I'm talking about an octopus that lives in a tree? Really? But it's there. Found it on the internet, therefore what do we need to know as teachers? What do we need to do to prepare students? What part of our digital literacy is our responsibility when we bring technology into teaching? Are there other things we should be worried about as teachers who work with language? What about technology that takes us to a place where we're suddenly redundant? Can you see the thing in this lady's ear? A Google Pixel earbud? Google Pixel earbuds. Real-time translation of 40 languages. Have this device in your ear, have the app on your phone, somebody speaks to you in Spanish, automatic translation of what they're saying in your first language, or a language you're familiar with. What place for language teachers if this is going to be the future of automated translation and technology Is this something we need to be afraid of? The people at Google are working hard on it. They see that the fundamental change that's going to come, reported just last month, all of their efforts are going into search, speech recognition. That if we can accurately tell what people are saying, then there's so much we can do with it. But you can see the troubles they're having with it. Actually, the complexity of language, the world in which we all work, is something so complex, such a dynamic system, so changeable, that actually no algorithm is even coming close to resolving some of the fundamental problems yet. And I like to think that we're all safe for a good while yet. That the nuances and subtleties of language are so culturally bound and cognitively complex that it's not possible to explain to a computer program what to do. I like to think that it'll be a long while before Google can tell the difference between "I'm in the bath" and "I'm in the bar." A simple translation is going to get you in a lot of trouble in one of those contexts. But we know there are translation tools out there. We know that there are resources that learners use, that we use in our everyday lives. Should they be things that we bring into education, that we have as valid resources, that we have as things that can be part of the learning process? Using online translators, using these grammatical checkers that are available now? Well, I think yes, I think there is a place for them. But that needs to be mediated by teachers, and that's part of the teacher's role in dealing with technology, is looking at this ways in which these can be a valuable tool. Again, if it's not used appropriately, it can be terribly ineffective. As in this sign. A sign that was shown in Wales. Someone needed to, an English speaker needed to get the Welsh translation for this sign they wanted to put in Wales, where there's a dual language policy. So, rather than just use an online translator, they thought, I'll ask a real translator, I'll send a request for this translation to a human who works through the internet and will send me the response back. They received the response back in Welsh, put it on the sign, put the sign in situation. What does the actual Welsh translation say? Any Welsh speakers here? Actually, the Welsh translation which appears on the sign, which they got from emailing this translation agency, says, so this over-reliance on what we can get just by using the internet can land us in some sticky situations. We have to bear in mind that it's a responsibility not just to go and pick things off the shelf because they're there, because they're potential, but that there's a level of digital literacy needed by teachers in order to bring the assessment practices, the learning practices, the teaching practices into the classroom in a way that's fit for purpose, in a way that's actually going to add to the learning experience, add to the assessment validity in ways that we're comfortable with. But we don't have to do it. I mean, I think this idea of teacher empowerment is something that can cause a lot of resistance. Is it fair to say to teachers who are already overworked, time poor, underpaid, that this is something they will do? Personally, I think that we need to take steps. We need to take steps, and it's part of our responsibility as 21st century teachers to be aware of these opportunities and be critically evaluative of their potential. As Stephen Pinker said, we're not going to be forced to throw away pen and paper tests. We can always come up with a quiz on a piece of paper and get students to do it individually and in silence. That's fine. It's still going to be there as an option for the teacher. But, personally, I think that we have this responsibility to take those stones and build that bridge. The bridge which I think is critically between teaching, technology and assessment, that actually we feel comfortable with the types of tools that are out there that we want to use and that can make a difference to the learners in the learning process. In the workshop that follows this at 3:30, we're going to be exploring different aspects of technology which have a potential impact on the way we assess our learners. There is no doubt that we assess as teachers. There is no doubt that, yes, we test, but also from the very moment that you walk into the classroom for the first time or you meet your learner for the first time, you're involved in assessment the whole time. In every walk of life, we are constantly assessing, evaluating. You're evaluating me now, I'm evaluating you by the looks on your faces. I am constantly in this process of assessment to make decisions about when to reiterate, when to repeat, when to go back, when to go slower. And we do this all the time. So we have these opportunities. Whether we make them visible and explain to students is a critical choice that we have to make. We're going to be looking at 5 tools, but the tools themselves aren't particularly important. What's more important is the idea behind the tools. Technology is available which allows us to do things differently in terms of assessment, particularly of language, in the classroom or in the wider educational context. So we're going to be talking about the idea of e-portfolios, but not in the sense of upload a document, therefore you've got an e-portfolio. The idea of a one-stop platform where you can gather this information that becomes both a learning opportunity and an assessment opportunity. We're going to be talking about what these spaces do and what we need to be able to do to use them effectively. We're going to be talking about using video to give feedback, using tools such as screen capture and screencasting to bring a technological aspect to the way in which we give feedback to our learners. The research shows that this can be more personalised, more effective in terms of revisiting by students, and also bridge that gap that often technology might leave people cold and they want the face-to-face tutorial. We're going to be talking about assessment tools that put mobile first, that think about actually if learners are coming into the classroom in your context with the power in their pocket or in their handbag vastly superior to technology we had 20 years ago, shouldn't we be embracing that in little ways? Shouldn't we be using mobile first decisions about little assessments that we do in the classes, the quizzes, the potential for gauging opinion surveys? Should we be doing that mobile first? We're going to be talking about what are the options if the technology is not in the hands of the learners. What if the options are that the teacher has the control of the technology and we don't necessarily have the capacity, or for inclusive purposes or for school policy, that the technology is not in the students' hands? Can we still use technological potential to do things differently in the way we approach assessment? And we're going to be talking about ways in which we can encompass the affordances of using video in the way we assess that will provide a platform both for informal assessment and for more formal assessment tools that learners can do individually, collaboratively, depending on the settings that we choose. The fundamental considerations here are ones of principle and where you put yourself in this continuum from rejecting technology through to embracing it. Every one of us in the room will have a different position on that continuum. Mine, I know, consciously is quite far to the embracing end of the spectrum, but I don't want to stand here and say to you, that's the right answer. The responsibility for a 21st century teacher is to have critical decision-making capacity and empowerment to make those decisions for the learners that they work with, in collaboration with the peers that they also work with, to say, okay, this is where technology sits, this is the way I approach assessment, and I'm comfortable that the two can be married in a way that's going to be beneficial both for my time, workload and outcomes, and for the way students are going to need to use technology in their daily lives as well as their educational lives. One consideration in this, which we're going to be looking at in the workshop, is summarised by one more. If you're going to try to walk on water, make sure you wear your comfortable shoes. We may not all be digital natives. We may not all think mobile first in the way we approach teaching, learning and assessment, but we all have the love of education that's brought us to this room today, to our careers, and we have that potential to do things that are baby steps into the affordances of technology, the things that technology can potentially give us in the assessment sphere that we can do and feel comfortable with. And hopefully in the workshop I'll be able to show you some practical ideas that you will evaluate and make your own decisions by. I think for me, what I'd like to leave you with is the idea that we have this potential at our fingertips, and what we need to do is just to reach out and take it. We've got that potential in our hands, and we can share that with our students. Even if we throw that to the students, we have to be ready when it comes back from them to catch it and hold it and work with it with our students. I hope that's been useful as an overview, and hope to see some of you in the workshop. We can explore these tools in detail together. Thank you very much.